going to give a little introduction and then I'm going to turn it over to Renee. I got this email after our Save the Date went out sometime in the spring. We sent out a Save the Date from the symposium. And I received an email from Renee Moreno from USC Northridge, and saying, no, it's CSU. We're all CUs and CSUs. Yeah, I knew I was wrong as soon as I said it. Saying, I hear you doing the symposium. Can I present? Can I put together a panel? And it was like, wow, how did you find out? We're doing the symposium. Talked about all these connections to the community. And I thought, yes, we're going to find you a slot. Wanting to do something about art and activism connected to the community. And I thought, yes, we have to find you a slot. So I was really excited to have this panel here. And yeah, I think we're going to be really excited about these speakers. So I'm going to turn it over to Renee.
Okay. So good afternoon, everybody. So, you know, as a professor, I'm never used to just sitting down. I always like to stand up and move around. But, you know, we are where we are. So I just want to introduce myself. So, you know, as Marjorie said, my name is Renee Moreno, and I'm a professor in Chicana and Chicano studies at Cal State University Northridge. And just a little bit about my department. So we are the oldest and largest Chicano studies in the nation. There are probably about 28 full-time faculty members, and then we have about double that number of part-time faculty members. So I come from a very big and proud tradition of Chicano studies at Cal State Northridge. Cal State Northridge was also one of the sites of protests to establish ethnic studies way back in like 1968. Everybody hears the story of San Francisco State University and their struggle for ethnic studies, and it was big and it was important, but actually it was Cal State Northridge that started that whole movement for ethnic studies. So we are happy, we are proud, we are a highly functional department. when some are not. Trust me, I was at UCLA. I know what their department is like. It's not functional. But we won't say that publicly. But anyway, and then what's really unique about where I am is you know, we're interdisciplinary, and that was always the intention of the founder of our department, Rudy Acuna, whose work you may know. So he wrote that sort of like the quintessential book, Occupied America. And it's still used today. It's a textbook that people use. And he's amazing and wonderful. He's still alive. He's still ornery, still making trouble. So, you know, happy and proud to be part of that department. I also want to introduce my friend and, you know, I always like to say co-conspirators, right? Because we're shaking shit up. So this is Carlos Fresquez. Carlos is an artist and a professor of art at Metropolitan State University here on this campus. He also like has this long history of being an artist and being active in the community and has many things around. So, you know, in the most unexpected places, I mean, some places you do expect. I mean, he's probably going to talk a little bit about his own work and the sculpture that he has. And I don't know, do we still call it the Westside? Or do they call? Okay, okay. So in the Westside, but I also saw a painting of yours in all places at the Kaiser Building in downtown, or uptown, or whatever you all are calling that place right now. So you know, so just keep your eye out. You know, you will find Chicano art everywhere you look. So, you know, happy and proud to be on this panel with Carlos. And then my friend, um, somebody that I deeply respect, that I deeply honor. This is Carlota Espinoza, who has been an artist for a long time. Like she was an art, all of 20 years old, right? She was creating art with my father. And getting like I told this story recently, Carlotta. So last weekend I was on the radio program Libro Traficante with Tony Diaz from Houston. And I was telling your story, which, which you told me when I first started interviewing you about my father. You told me it was unusual for a woman, a Chicana, to climb a scaffold that was, 20 feet, 30 feet above the earth. And to look down on people and to look down on men who looked up at her and wondered, what are you doing there? So this has been, this has been about sort of like the work that I've been doing has been about recovering these kinds of stories, because I don't think that people know them. And, again, it's sort of like this history of recovering history, the story of recovering history, the story of sort of like filling in the blanks. So I think that's really important. I don't know if I'm supposed to do the PowerPoint presentation. Oh, okay, then I'm gonna do that. I get to stand up. Okay.
Can you turn it this way so we can see?
Yeah, I can. I think I can. Can you see that? Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, again, the work that I'm doing. With this uncovering of history of Chicana and Chicano artists in Denver, Colorado. And I focus on a kind of unique time period from 1967 to 1972. And I'm doing that purposely because I was interested in the work that Carlota and my father and a couple of other artists were doing here in Denver that kind of coincided with what was going on in Chicana movement across the city and across the state and across the country. And so their work coincided with Corky Gonzalez's movement for civil rights here in Denver. But they were also doing Chicano art. So they were sort of like, in that kind of movement to bring attention and to call attention to the kind of artists that were in this community, including here. So those are the stories that I tell. And then, just as a way to kind of remember, people that I love and that I've lost, like my father, my sister. At the time that I developed this, my older sister, Tony, had not passed, and I forgot to update the screen or the screen that you're seeing, but my other sister, Tony, also passed. My spouse's parents, George and Philomena Yon, my uncle Tupi Davis, and then this is a poet by the name of Seiko Sundiata that I love, that I always sort of like felt was my ghost mentor. And then of course my nephew Martin Luevano. This is something that I also like to always say at the beginning of my talks is that we have an obligation as people who are, who are scholars and people who are thinking about stuff to love, study, and struggle. And this comes from my mentor, Robin Kelly's book, Freedom Dreams, but I don't think it's like really in there. I think he may have just sort of like said that to me. And then I just said, oh God, I have to cite it from someplace. But what this means, I think what he means by that, to love, study, struggle, is really the basis of this work. So I want to begin, just by showing this historical photo, and you can see it. And let me tell you that when I was doing this work, I counted on informants in the community. I didn't know about any of this stuff. And so because I was a young a wee girl when my father passed in 1972. It's been 50 years since he's been gone, and I basically knew nothing about his life. I mean, how could I mean, how could we, right? We were so young. So Carlota told me when I first met her, she brought out this photo and she said, you have to have this because it's a documentation of the work that your father was doing. And I remember when Carlos saw this picture, one of the things he said about my father was sort of like how regal looking he was in this picture. Um, I imagine in my mind's eye, I imagine that panel behind him is purple because I imagine my father as a leader and as a king. And that's not imaginary. My father was active in labor movement. He was active in the Chicano arts movement. He was active in his family, with his family, in community. He was also active here at this church because this was my grandmother's parish. So, you know, so he was everywhere. And then you can see a very young Carlota, who is to my left, and then another artist by the name of Carlota Espinoza. And then the two women, Carlota, you'll have to, and Carlos, you'll have to remind me. I think one of the women is Salcedo?
Yeah, Judy.
Judy Salcedo?
She taught at Westside.
Okay,
She was an art teacher there for years. Well loved.
okay. And then the other woman is?
That's Frances Mendez. She was married to a Mayan Indian who lived in Canajapa in New Mexico.
Oh, okay, okay. So now we know who these, now I'm gonna have to fix that slide. Okay, so so I'm just gonna sort of like, you know, run through some of the images that my father created during the short time that he walked this earth. You know, this is and one of the other things that I did to kind of piece together this work was I actually had to go to archives. We don't know where this photo is, where this painting is. And I think, like, you know, Carlota will also collaborate this, that, you know, that my father's art at the time when he was creating it was valued. So he would paint things and he would sometimes give them away. Sometimes paintings would disappear because people took them or claimed them. And so this is one of those things that I don't know where it is or in whose possession it is in, but I do know the name of this because I found an article when I was doing my research. And that article was about an exhibit that they were having at one of the centers, El Centro Cultural, here in the Westside, not far from the campus. So that's one of the paintings that he did. This is another painting, and I have to tell you that with this painting, it's backwards because the Virgin always looks to the right. Yeah. And so, you know, I kind of have to flip that around too. Again, would not have known that because I have never seen this painting. And I don't think we know where this one is either. But again, you know, kind of like, you know, as is the tradition for many Chicano artists, you know, painting the Virgin is iconic. She's an icon in our community. She's an icon in the across the Americas. One of the other things that I was sort of like, you know, cognizant about was things he would do for his friends. So this is, and then the way that he was also documenting history in his paintings. So this is a portrait of Sal Duarte, the first gospel drummer. And I know that's the title of this piece because if you look on the back, he printed that, he wrote it. So, you know, this is sort of, and he dated it, 1958. So, you know, this is like so cool because again, I would just say for students who are here in the audience, this is the hard part, or maybe not even like the discovery part of archival work. is when you start getting down into the nitty gritty and you start sort of like, you know, kind of looking at things that you didn't know, or asking people to turn, you know, to turn the painting around just so that you can see if there are any marks, or, and again, you can see the age of this. You can see pretty clearly that he signed it, pretty clearly that he put a title to it. And this was a real person, one of his buddies who I think owned a jewelry shop. And I suspect I didn't wear it, which I don't, you know, it was kind of a crazy, chaotic morning for me, but I do have my father's Hamilton watch, like, you know, an old Hamilton watch that he owned, very valuable, these Hamilton watches, which, you know, I didn't really know at the time. I didn't wear it today, but I have a feeling that maybe they traded, you know, like maybe that was another thing that he did, was he traded, you know, his paintings for something. And I have a feeling, I can't confirm this, but I have a feeling that that watch was maybe part of this trade. I don't know. Another one of the artists that, okay, so let me just back up for a minute and just kind of tell you that one of the things that my father was doing with Carlota Espinoza and an artist by the name of Ray Crespin, was they developed one of the first art collectives called the Group Workshop. And so they had rented a storefront on about, it was right across from the, if you know, what's the Exodus bar? So if you know where that is, it's like around like 20th and Walton, maybe. So in that kind of area is where they had it's a parking lot now that the structure has long since disappeared.
Kind of close to Holy Ghost Church.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of near a church, which is interesting. So they painted together, they created together, and this is definitely one of the paintings that Ray Espinoza created as a result of their collaboration with the Group Workshop. I think it's amazing. And the story behind this, as he told me, was that they would often just have, you know, I guess like the 60s was this time when many people were kind of just wandering. You know, you're having that again in Denver. You know, there's a lot of people who are just young people who are just wandering the streets. And that was happening back in the day. And this was a portrait that Ray painted of these two guys who just came in. You know, oftentimes the artists would pay them to sit for them or to model for them. And sometimes they didn't pay them, but they gave them food, or they let them sleep in the gallery. So this is one of those paintings. This is another painting by Ray Espinoza, more kind of traditional looking. You know, when you think about Chicano art, I think you have to think about the color of Chicano art. You have to think about sort of the iconography that comes up over and over again. And certainly protest was one of those things, like, you know, documenting different kinds of protests. This one is the boycott against lettuce and grapes that was happening at the time. This is a photo which I have to give that to you, which I have to give back to Carlota, of Bob Crespin. I'm so sorry. So Bob Crespin was a graphic artist, and I don't have much of his work, but recently I was in touch with his son. So Bob died not long ago, like maybe less than 5 years ago. And his son had no idea that his father was a painter, and, you know, knew about his graphic art, but didn't know that he had been working with this group of people at the time. And so I sent him an electronic copy of this, and then he just asked, if you know of any other paintings that exist, please let me know. And in fact, I do. We're kind of working on getting those paintings released from from wherever they're being held. And then this is actually a painting in the archive at the Denver Public Library. You can go there as a person and ask them to bring out this piece, and you can sit with it and you can feel it. and you can look at it. It's beautiful. It's very kind of like dimensional. And if you can, you know, just take a look, it's about a story about Colorado. And then the last couple pieces I just want to show you is another really important person to my work has been the Mexican-American artist and collector, Carlos Estevan. And this is possibly at, again, El Centro, I guess it's a different place, but it was something place here in Colorado or in Denver.
Yeah, that's the Crusade
Oh, that's
Gallery.
a Crusade.
He
Okay.
had pretty much the first gallery all through the
Yeah,
United States.
right. Yeah, like,
The
yeah,
piece he's
I think
holding
so.
is one of mine.
Okay, okay, cool. All right. So again, this is living history. And then I just want to close with and hand it over to Carlos. You know, I just want to thank again the people that I've been working with on this history, and you know, sort of like thinking about like how important like folks are to you know, the way that I sort of like develop my ideas around collecting this history. So, you know, obviously there was a lot of people here. So Carlos, Carlota, you know, there are folks in my department who supported me with this project. And then, you know, I just want to thank new friends, right? So Marjorie Levine Clark, who really graciously allowed me to invite myself to the symposium. And then and seriously, like I can be sort of like a hustler, right? I mean, I learned this from one of my good friends. And I do that all the time is I hustle. I sort of like, and I don't know if your vice provost is in the house, but he kind of promised me some money. So I'm going to get that from him. And then I just want to thank my friend and my colleague, Jorn Langhorst, whose scholarship about place, landscape, and identity has helped me to frame displacement as violence, as trauma, and as loss. And part of the work that I'm doing is to recover, right? And to remember. And then, of course, my friend and my mentor, Robin Kelly, whose work on social movements has always been really important to my identity and my being. And he's got this wonderful quote in his book, Freedom Dreams, which I have right up here, where he talks about sort of like how we always lose track in the day-to-day sort of like, you know, hustle and bustle of our lives. But it's really the artists, no matter the medium, who succeed in rendering the color of the sky. And this is what I think about these folks, is that it's the artists that we look to for our sense of being. And as always, my work is dedicated to those who came before, those who loved, studied, and struggled. Thank you. Okay, I won't do it. No. Here's folks on Zoom, see your slides. It may take just a minute to be able to move them. There's a delay right now, but in a minute they'll be.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's nice to have some attendance. I've given talks where there's like 3 people in the audience, where there's 3 on the panel. So it's nice that we have some folks here that are interested in the subject. Thank you, Renee, for the invitation to be here. And I also want to thank Carlota, who I've known for quite some time and has been someone that I've admired. And she's just a little bit older than me. And so I looked up to her and saw her work in my youth and led to aspire to become someone like her. So thank you, Carlota, for what you do and what you've done. To start this out, I'd like to just say there's this book called Where the Rivers Meet. And if you want to know more about the history of this neighborhood, it was originally, if I recall, published by El Centro Su Teatro, and then it was republished by Metro State University. But there's wonderful stories about the history and the people that lived here. I think this was published originally 2005, if I recall, and then this second printing is 2011. So if you could find that, it's a wonderful read here, and it's wonderful to see and experience the history here. And speaking of history here, I was baptized here back in a month after my birth. So it was July 1956, right down here. My parents have pictures of me getting the holy water thrown at me, probably just screaming as a 1 month old, So, and then, yeah, it's kind of interesting being, born in this neighborhood, baptized in this same church. And then I went to school, Metro State, got my undergrad here. And then my master's up in CU Boulder. So go CU, go Metro. So, and it's really peculiar too, because I just can't seem to leave this neighborhood. I look out my office window, just right across the street here, and I look out and here's this church. And here I am at 66 years old, just still in the same spot. It just seems like the world spins around me, moving, living, experiencing, and being here. So it just meant to be here, I guess, it's one of those things. So let's see if this moves. Okay, did it move? It's not moving for me.
I think it's like
Yeah, see?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Now it's working. Thank you. See, we need technical assistance. I actually call myself the low-tech Aztec, because I really don't do much technology. Give me a paintbrush. Give me a paintbrush. My talk here, I call it being here. Estar aquí. And I say being here because of what I just said. I'm here. My ancestry is a mestizo, indigenous. My family goes back to mostly New Mexico, central New Mexico, Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Pecos, Taos, for centuries. And growing up, not knowing that really bothered me. So if we look at what, I don't know if you could see with the red X where it says Dene, Hopi, and Zuni, that would be Santa Fe, New Mexico. And my family goes back, again, for centuries in that region. My last name, Fresquez, is first documented in Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1617. So I'm being here. We have a New Spain. The place is still there. What we call Santa Fe, still there. We have the country of Mexico being created in 1821. And in 1848, the US goes to war solely to take the land in the name of Manifest Destiny. My family's still there. The border changed on us. Our family never crossed the border. Mm-hmm. The borders always changed on us. It was 1848. Well, February 1st, my family went to sleep as Mexican citizens. The next day, they woke up as US citizens. The border changed on us. Being here. So I'd like to share a bit about my artwork and kind of how I maneuver through it, and how sometimes subtleties can mean a lot in art. One thing that really experiences, we just mentioned the photo you had of Carlos Santisteban. It was in the Crusade for Justice. And that was actually my very first exhibition in high school, was there at the Crusade for Justice. My first demonstration was September 16th, 1969. I had never seen a river of Chicanos moving from what we call Lodo now today and moving up to the state capitol. There, I saw, others protest. Out of the crusade, we painted some protest banners and posters. And I was able to see empowerment. I saw the edge. I saw brown berets. I saw and heard Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez speaking and telling me that my culture is a proud one. It's an important one, and it's something to cherish and to do good with. In September 16th, 1969, I was 13 years old. Huge impact on me. That's the moment I began what I call a culture quest. I just spoke of mestizaje, and I know currently the term mestizo is part of the casta system, and a lot of people don't care for that, but I'm trying to think of another word that might describe this mixture. Am I a hybrid? Should I call myself a hybrid? Should I call myself of two people? Shall I call myself a twin? So, I don't know, but I think mestizo best describes, since the Spanish came and dominated and shifted my culture, to me, it just makes the most sense, even though, again, I understand it is part of this tragedy that occurred over these histories. This symbol came about by Francisco Elguera Epens, the mestizo head. It's a giant mural he did called Vida. And I was lucky enough to see that much later in my art career here. And it's a very moving image that he created to represent and symbolize that duality, right? One side being indigenous, the other side of the face being European, and that mixture in the middle is who I am. I am from here, being here. My family goes back to New Mexico for centuries, as I stated. When the Spanish come in, adobe is very pliable when it's wet, and before it's sun-dried, right, and it gets solid as like a brick, and they make bricks. The adobe is remolded to create these churches. Out of this remolding, the Spanish come in and they want to decorate the inside of these churches. My ancestor was one of these saint makers who defined this art form. There are no antecedents. Pedro Antonio Fresquez, he created this art form we see still to this day in New Mexico. From here, being here. What he did was look at what the indigenous people had done. They had taken pigments from the earth. They had taken soil and found pitch from smoke and fire to create blacks, red out of the earth, ochres out of the earth. They just imitated what maybe even, as some of you may know, of Chicana dolls, the paint and pigment out of that. He painted just imitating the indigenous people, because he himself was a mestizo as well, right? And I'm showing this because we're talking about displacement throughout all our culture. Here's a image of the Rosario Chapel, which he had painted in Trujas, New Mexico. Jump up to the 60s when we see muralism come into play. And on our stage, to my right, we have to be considered the first Chicana muralist in the United States, Carlota Espinoza. I was inspired by that. I saw that on the walls. And she was is considered the first Chicana muralist in this country. God, man, it's still here. Look at it. I saw images on walls and text that we are not a minority. I was inspired by La Alma Park, and I did this painting when I was a student here at Metro State. When the campus was built. Actually, I was on campus before the campus was built. I was just talking to Dolores Moreno over here. I'm guessing your last name is Moreno. I don't know if you're married or not, but we were students together. We were just talking about that in the 70s before the campus was built. This campus was built, and I just, for some reason, I always remembered her from back in the day. And when the campus was built, I used to go to Lincoln Park and stay with my grandparents who lived in the housing projects here. And I just remember sitting in front of the pool and looking how and studying the water reflect. And it reminded me kind of a Monet painting, how the lily pads, and he would paint. And I just loved how color reflected in the water. So I did a drawing of that. And this is just alive on its own here. And so I did this drawing, and then I did this painting years later of the neighborhood. Place, being here. My mother used to tell me of the rabble-rousers, as she called them, the defiant ones, the zoot-suiters, the pachucos. They're on Broadway. She would go to work in downtown, and they'd be hitting on her as she was a teenager. And she just despised the zoot-suiters, the pachucos. But they were like the first rebels, you know, they were rebelling against what the norm was. And so I've always looked up to them because some of my uncles were actually pachucos. So I always liked that rebellious nature. And so I decided to paint myself in the Rockies here. So I title it Zutu en los Rockies. But I put myself in a pink suit because I didn't want to be so threatening. Plus, to dismantle the idea of machismo, you know. During the 70s, I got into like punk, and I started kind of collaging things. And I just love the fact of being able to fuse together an image of the Statue of Liberty in Our Lady Guadalupe, Nuestra Señora. And so in punk-like fashion, I just chopped up some newspaper photocopies and created this image to represent myself, because I am of these two cultures and living that at the same time, this mixture, right? And art and activism. When I was lucky enough to quit my job and survive as an artist in 1990, I realized at that point I need to be active in my community. I'm expecting my community to support me. I'm expecting my community to purchase my artwork so I can survive and feed my family. I'm expecting my community to support me so I can pay my bills. I'm expecting my community to support me so I can pay my house. And so if I'm expecting, then I should give back. There's that old adage, the more you give, you get back, right? You give, you get back. So I started giving back to the community. I started going into schools, giving talks and lectures to young kids from all levels, from grade schools to high schools, colleges. And around the early 90s, here in Denver, we had what was called the Summer of Violence. And I heard people complaining like, someone needs to do something about this. And I'm not in law enforcement, nor do I know how to stop a bullet from advancing towards somebody. But I do know artwork, and I do know how to create something that can hopefully affect. So I decided to create this room installation, and I called it the Códices of the Barrio. And it was an anti-gang ofrenda, 1991. On the walls, just like in gang-like or graffiti-like fashion, I had the youth that I work with write on the walls a poem by then a Denver poet, Joe Navarro. The poem is titled, "Why Can't Chicanos Get Educated in America?" And so I broke it down into 5 pages. And on the walls you can see 3 pages here. And in the center of this space, we created an altar to the children that were killed through gang violence. And if you see these 2 columns, there's a list of kids on the what would be on your right side, if you could see it. Oh, I guess it's on your right side. There's a list there of kids, and their names are listed in the year that they died. I had never heard of kids being shot through drive-bys. When I was a kid, I seen, you know, some violence, a kid get beat up with a chain. I've seen a stabbing. I had a gun pulled on me, but never have I seen so many children dying through gang violence. So this is my response. I worked with a dozen or so kids from different high schools and schools. I went through the 4 quadrants, north, south, east, and west. And I pulled kids out, I talked to the art teachers. I want to do something to respond to this gang violence. And so the kids came up with this slogan up above this tag in here. It says, "Stop the homicide," which I thought was really cute and clever. And the kids just kind of at the end of this exhibition, they really thanked me for letting them have a voice. And that was the biggest thing. They said, no one listens, no one pays attention. So I'm grateful that I was able to give a voice. On this altar, they had bullets in the form of a cross, marijuana joints in form of a cross. They had funeral notices of the kids that had been slain on the streets, being here. The mestizo had reappeared, showing that duality. We all live with duality, right? We live with duality. We have good and bad. We have to make choices, right? But when you have duality of culture, you have to learn to unite the two. We ourselves have to learn to not fight against each other. So the duality to me is something we need to confront and live with and create a better society. And I want to share this piece too, because I did this little side altar, just like my ancestor, Pedro Antonio Fresquez, had created this side altar. I did one as well called Drive By. And these are some of my taggings. And speaking of taggings, you know, I used to tag the Westside. My tag was Raza C, you know, Raza C, you know. And I would tag, I don't know if you ever saw it here in the neighborhood. And I remember just driving by and walking by, and I was like, man, I'm fucking up my neighborhood. What am I doing, you know? So then I put it onto canvas and my artwork transformed. I took art off the street into the galleries. And so that's probably, you know, kind of threw me off on that little tangent there. But this piece is actually on a car hood, and a couple of lines from the Joe Navarro poem called Drive By. A barrio driven to madness, raza hating raza, and in the end, 2 souls die. And so this is actually in the Emmanuel Gallery on campus here. If you want to step in there, there's the Rat Fink exhibition. The curator, Jeff, included me in the show, and he saw this piece. Like, oh, I got to put this in. So if you want to see it in person, it is there right now. Promote the galleries, you know, in America, being here. And these are the kids I work with. You might know Francisco Gallardo. He runs Gang Rescue and Support Project. He was like 16 years old when I worked with him. Same with Felipe, Gabriel Salazar. Mandy Medrano currently works in West Denver. She was like 12 years old. I'm grateful I was able to assist these and guide these children. it touches me because, you know, it's a powerful thing to do. It's an important thing to do. And we need to do more. You mentioned the Denver Public Library. This piece, they purchased it. It's a mural I had done about early Denver. Talk about displacement here, right? One thing that's maybe missing from our history books, and maybe some historians out there may know this, but Denver was actually, since this was part of Mexico at one time, there were Mexicanos living here before Denver City was even founded. You've probably read the Cheyenne Arapaho living. They were encamped on by the Cherry Creek and Platte River, just right out our door here. They were living here long before any of us even knew of this place, right? But as the Mexicano came in and this became part of Mexico, around the Platte River and Alameda and Florida, West Florida, right between there was mining by Mexicanos. And when the white man came in, they call it Mexican diggings. They came in oops, I'm going too fast here. They came in, and I made a note because I don't remember too many facts, numbers, but Mexican diggings was here in 1857, and Denver was founded November 22nd, 1858. So when like Larimer, William H. Larimer came in and such and founded Denver, they made note there were Mexicans already living here. And they saw they were mining. So they go back east and say there's gold in these rivers. So all these people came out and found it in Denver City. And what do? They jumped the claim of the Mexicans and they chased them out and took over their claim. Early displacement, probably the first displacement in the city. And it hasn't stopped, right? And we owe the cowboy a lot because the whole language came from it. The lariat is la rieta in Spanish, the vaqueros, buckaroo, so on and so forth, right? It's like the Mexicano contributed so much here, but yet we're never welcomed, you know? And I still feel that to this day. I'm being here, I'm from here, and I still feel unwelcome, like I don't belong here. Time's up? Is that what that is? Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll keep going. So here's a mural on well, we're as an educator, we just learn to talk and talk and talk, and there's the time to shut up, you know. But yeah, this is on 35th and Downing, a mural, and Morrison Road and South Sheridan. And let me jump up because if my time's up, I wanted to end here. This is my last image, by the way. When I created this painting in 1991, the schools were supposed to attach themselves to the community, and I felt they hadn't. So I had this marriage between the school and the community, and people had always asked me, well, there's a couple getting married, but there's nobody there celebrating. It's like, why should we? The schools did not come forth what they're supposed to do. They promised scholarships, they promised this and that by displacing our families. So once Metro State came forward, probably the first school to do it, they had the Displaced Iranian Scholarship, came through, and UCD, CU Denver did as well. I did a painting with people celebrating. So I'll close with that. Thank you. Don't we have 5 hours? Is that what you mean?
This painting, you got a pies and it's all on display. They move it around though.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, but it's really good. It's smaller than that, but it's really beautiful. Is that you getting married with your wife?
Yeah,
It's beautiful.
41 years ago.
Wow.
That's what I say.
Congratulations.
Wow. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, that's really great.
No, it is good. Thank you.
You just have to share with us. Those of you who've been here all day know it's our 20-second delay while Zoom figures out what's going on.
Oh, that's right. You've been here all day. Huh? Oh, man.
Wait for it. Wait for it. There we go.
So I'm gonna, I'm just gonna.
These two guys were really fabulous people and they did a lot for the Chicano neighborhood at that time. Gil is the one on this side, that's what. I'm all turned around. And this, I think I was probably maybe 28 here, and I made that check. They had given us this 3,000 towards the art studio that we were working, the Central Cultural. And this is me when I was about 10. I'm going to be 80 in 5 months, so that's a long time ago. And this was kind of my first mural. Can you hear me? Okay. So no.
Move the mic down.
Yeah, we can move it.
I moved it up.
Thank you.
There you go.
Because you're so tall. But this was kind of my first mural. Actually, it wasn't. My first mural was when I was probably 8 years old. My mother gave me an old sheet and I hung it up and they tacked it down and I worked with Crayolas to create I was pretty religious, so it was Jesus with angels and it was done with Crayolas. And it's really hard to work with Crayolas on material. But I came out and then I took it got on the bus to take it to give it to the sisters and forgot it on the bus. So it disappeared. But this here, it was painted on plywood in one piece. So that was kind of a mural. I was 10 here and the little kid, the little baby was my little brother. And then we have, it's a nativity scene. So I'm going to jump to her father. I wanted to tell you, her father was kind of, how many of you have seen Stand and Deliver? Anybody? Okay. Well, that's a movie everybody should see. It's Edward Olmos is playing this actual professor out of California, East LA. It's a fabulous movie. And her father was kind of like that teacher. He had that kind of power and energy and smartness and creativity. Her father was so creative in so many ways. He was a good man. He loved his wife. His wife was like a movie star. You know, when I saw her, I thought, wow, what a beautiful woman. And she still is, right? And he was very supportive of me as a female artist. People used to say, I used to enter contests. I was probably in my 20s and people would say, no, you're a woman, you're taking work away from men, so you can't do this. And when I did, and then I did get on scaffolds and ladders, people would come by and say, you're acting like a man, you know, you shouldn't be doing that. And there was a lot of criticism for women when for me to paint. I wasn't supposed to even paint. And anyway, this here, since we're looking at this picture, this is Espinoza. And this is a painting I did of him. Every time I'd see him, he'd say, do a painting of me. And I would do these paintings of him. And this was one he had done. Espinoza is a really fantastic artist. I haven't seen him in years. You have a relationship with him.
Sort of, kind of, no.
Yeah. I don't really, but anyway, this is a mural I did probably when I was, I'm saying 2022. And this was part of this. There was a fire, there was a bombing at the Crusade for Justice. Was a building connected with it, not really there, but it was also part of the Crusade for Justice. And somebody, I guess teenagers, threw a bomb into it, the cocktail bomb, I think, isn't that what they used to call them? Okay, yeah, thank you. And it caught the place on fire. And there were two murals, and this one was based on women's power and women's brutality. And this was completely burned up, this one. I did do another, because this was a mural in progress. If you go to the Rudolfo Jorge Gonzalez Library, it's on Irving and Colfax, right? The mural is a mural of the three heroes, and it's Zapata, Pancho Villa, and Presidente Juarez, were massively wonderful heroes in Mexico. Not everybody loved them, of course, but they were really, I did this mural that was connected to that other mural that got burned up. And that one got burned on the edges. So if you go to the library, you'll see where I had to cut off some of the pieces that were like crackers because it was so burned so bad. So it's at the Rudolfo Jorge Gonzalez Library. This one here is just a painting I did. This belongs to Carlos Santisteban. I wanted to talk a little bit about your painting, your sculpture. You did a wonderful sculpture of a guitar with all kinds of Chicano representative things on Morrison in Sheridan. It's wonderful. If you drive down Sheridan on Morrison, you'll be able to see it. It's magnificent. And Carlos has done a lot of things. When I was going to Metro, I started going about 40, when I was 40 or 50, and he was a teacher right next door. So I used to sneak over to see what he was doing. Very interesting teacher. And he's still there, right?
Yeah,
Wow, that's fabulous.
still here.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Like he said, he belongs here. You belong here. And this painting here is a mural that I did at Our Lady of Guadalupe. And I got a lot of flack on this one. A lot of flack from the old ladies. You're a puta. What are you doing pictures like that for? Was what they would say to me, you know? And then this priest came in after it was painted, and he put a wall in front of it. What he was a sheetrock and he put it up, and he had put a beautiful it was a beautiful sculpture of a white Madonna, and she had beautiful blue eyes and blonde hair holding the baby, and he put that there after he put the wall up. And I was kind of worried because I wasn't sure if it was marble and might fall through the church, because the church is pretty old. So
Maybe that would be.
yeah, this one is oh yeah, there's Carlos Fresquez. This was at the art museum, and on the end over there is this Al Sanchez, who's a really great artist. He doesn't do much anymore, but his murals were wiped out also. A lot of these artists had murals wiped out. There's Carlos with the scarf on. He did a lot for artists. He was very encouraging and motivating. And then, of course, Carlos Fresquez over here, beautiful hair. And he has a really nice wife, very pretty wife, very nice. And this is Manuel Martinez. He called Emmanuel. He has a lot of art everywhere. It's wonderful art, and he's a really good artist. Yeah. This is a piece that was broken treaties and broken vows. That's what this painting represents. For the Native American peoples, her hair turns into barbed wire. The red becomes blood that the Native Americans had to have spilled and stuff. So, people say you shouldn't do that to the flag. Well, at that time, all of the massacres and stuff of like Sand Creek, this kind of represents that era. And anyway, this painting is at the Smithsonian. I don't think they show it, but it's there if you want to see it. It is at the Smithsonian Institute. Okay, thank you so much.
So questions, anybody, please ask us and engage us for a little bit longer. So we still have about maybe 10 minutes left or so. So if there are any questions.
Yeah, Dr. Moreno, thank you. This is a very sensitive mic. You showed an image of the Virgin Mary looking over her right shoulder, except you said normally she looks to her right, and in that image that you showed, she was looking to her left. So what's the significance of her looking to her left? Is it just to be different, to be edgy, or is there something else going on there?
Well, that's a really good question. So because I had never seen that painting before, I didn't know the orientation. And so it was basically like, like I was saying, when you do archival work, you find stuff and you don't know what it means. And so that was actually a slide that Carlos Sanesteven gave me. And so I didn't know, like, because I had never seen the painting before, I had no idea which way it looked, which way she put her face, like she's always, if you see these pictures, the iconic pictures in Chicano community, the Virgin is always like this, and that's her depiction. But, again, I didn't know. And so I just, and I didn't have I can't, it's really simple. I could have just flipped it in my PowerPoint, right? And then it would have been right. But I also wanted to say that about maybe, I guess it was probably like maybe 6-8 years ago or so, Carlota came to CSUN. So I invited her to CSUN, and she did a mural. We did a mural in 3 days that's hanging in our writing center. And it's beautiful. And, I'm sure that if you go to our CSUN website, or maybe I can just share these files with you of the many murals that we have in our department, you'll see the mural that she worked on with students. And, when she talked about Carlos being the teacher, Carlota is a teacher too. And so when she was sort of like, handing us paintbrushes and and these were students who had never picked up a paintbrush before.
It was mostly done by the students. I drew it in and let them paint it.
Well, she's being modest. But because it's beautiful and it's lovely. And yeah, so maybe I'll share those images with you, and maybe you can just get them out to the students. So yeah, but thank you for the question. Anyone else? Oh, you should ask questions. We're not bad people. We're cool people. These are artists,
Yeah.
man.
So I kind of want to pull you back to the the topic of displacement, which I think all of you have something to say about, that was hidden or woven in your talks. I found the dates of your talk, your topic, Renee, are very coexist with what was going on here in the West Side, and the theme of displacement is certainly present, woven through your talk, Carlos. Could you say a little bit more explicitly about how the Chicano artist movement kind of engaged the issue of displacement in Denver?
Well, I'm not sure how much like occurred at the moment, because we're all active and busy and just kind of having to deal with having, being forced out. But this is one thing I can share is I know this was a thriving and beautiful community. My grandparents lived across the street in the housing projects, and when I'd stay with them on weekends, go to church here, and we'd cross Colfax from the North Lincoln housing projects, come to church. As we're walking down 9th Street, my grandmother knew everybody. Everybody knew everybody. So they'd stop and talk. She'd leave like a half hour early just to get here in 10 minutes, just because she had to stop and talk to everybody. Then when mass was over, they'd sit and stand in front of the church and talk about what's going on, or who's in trouble, or these kids, this or that. And they knew what was going on. Everyone took care of each other. They watched over each other. And when the displacement happened, all the community was gone.
Could I say something?
Oh, definitely.
At that time, you have to remember all kinds of little houses all over the place. And here on the campus were little houses too. They were little. And so it was a village, and all these people kind of were neighbors to one another. It was really a beautiful area. I used to come to this church as a child too with my grandmother, but I'm sure your mother and my grandmother kind of knew each other.
Sure they did.
Yeah. And it was just a wonderful area. I painted some paintings that mentioned the Casa Maya, which is it still there?
Yeah.
Oh, it was a wonderful place, wonderful. Joan Collins's mother, I met her there. She looks just like Joan Collins.
Oh,
you know, with their
the
hair.
actress.
Mhm. And anyway, it was a wonderful area.
Yeah, my very first recollection was walking down 9th Street with a stick. I'd always ask my grandfather to help me find a stick so I could walk along the fences and hit the stick as we go to church. And then I set it outside and hide it, so when I got out of church, I can go back and hit it back again. And then the last recollection is when the campus was being torn. All the houses were torn down. A lot of the houses torn down. It was still a church. The new St. Cajetan's at West Denver was being built, and my grandfather died, and the service was held here. It was one of the very last services, and there was actually chain link fence around everything. And you know how a limousine pulls up and they put the coffin inside there and such, and so they had to move around the fence. And that was like 1974, 75, somewhere in there. And that was my very last memory of the church being shut down and the community. You just look around, like you mentioned, Carlota, like you see 9th Street, that's like the last remnants, right? These houses, and that's what it looked like. All these beautiful little houses around, and other buildings, larger buildings, and then they just tore it all down in the name of progress. There was a lot of, I remember division. Some people really wanted it built, and others like, no, you're only doing this for the economy. And others were like, no, our children can get educated. So I see the battle, or that duality, but I mean, it's here and done, right? We're obviously decades later, and I feel right now that I'm glad this was here because I got a job here and I've been able to educate so many people. I've been teaching 33 years. So coming out of this neighborhood and being of this neighborhood and being able to give back to this neighborhood is truly an honor for me. Truly an honor for me. And I feel grateful. I'm retiring from teaching next year. And I feel grateful that I've been able to work and teach. I have no idea how many students, 4,000 or 5,000 students over the
And they
years.
love you. They love you.
But no, it is a brand new community, right? We are a community of institutions, and we need to hopefully work together more kindly and better amongst each other. And so it's nice that the scholarships came about too, that because I've had students be able to go to school for free, that their families are forced out of here. They're pushed out. And were promised in education for, I think it's 3 generations, I believe, I can't recall exactly. But one of my students was a displaced Iranian, and my family knew his family. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, and I guess I would also just say, like, you know, as part of, so another part of my life is sort of like, you know, keeping students enrolled in school, you know, thinking about attrition and thinking about, you know, students who drop out and how we as Chicanos traverse the educational pipeline. And that's, you know, like if you want to look at more of that work, it's really Danny Solarzano at UCLA who does it. So, you know, by the time you get to the PhD level as a Chicano or Chicana student, we're something like 0.02 or some shit, you know? So I'm going to say this, that, you know, we have to think about that pipeline issue. We have to, so it's cool, you know, give people scholarships, you know, pay for their education, but then pay for their graduate education, get them into PhD programs, get them into professorships, get them into some of those. And I know you do have this representation, but put them into those leadership positions on campus so that we can affect policy. That's a corrective, you know, that's a sort of like, that's a promise that you can correct. I mean, I'm sort of living proof that, you know, I grew up in Swansea. You know, my parents came to this church. This was my grandmother's church. I went to school at, you know, CU Denver, you know, after I sort of like couldn't really handle CU Boulder, I came here to CU Denver, got a master's degree, met people like Brad Munch, my professor in the back, and John Lofty, who said, you need to go to graduate school and you need to go to the University of Michigan. Imagine that, a girl from Swansea going to Michigan and then going to UCLA, going to Notre Dame, going back to CSUN. It's, you know, that's what you want for the students who've been displaced. That's a corrective to this narrative. Oh my gosh, okay. Yeah, thank you, everybody. And you can talk to these folks. These are, I mean, these are like amazing artists. So please talk to them. Please, yeah, please. Thank you.
Well, she's an amazing professor.
I try to be. I'm not always. My students hate me too. But I hate them.
Great Marias. How do you say Marias? Well, Marias.